Hi, I'm Dr. Cindy Dupuy. I have a PhD in learning disabilities. I do diagnostic assessments, a little bit of intervention, and some advocacy, if I could say that correctly. And I'm also an adult with dyslexia and dysgraphia.
My name is Kim Sharman. I work with kids preschool to college, and I've been working with kids with dyslexia and dysgraphia for the last 15 years. And I'm a remediation specialist.
Okay, so we are going to talk about one of my absolute favorite tests. I cannot truly imagine an assessment that I would do that would not include this test. Does that tell you how big a deal I think it is?
Yes, and that you parents should ask for it, please, when
Okay,
you have your child tested at the school.
yes. So now let's caveat that because I have had results of a GORT come back passed, and the GORT stands for
Was it great oral reading?
gray oral reading test, and the acronym is GORT, which is where we get GORT. And currently we're on the 5th edition. Okay. And so it's actually changed over the years. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But Kim, why do you think to me it's a go-to test? Knowing what you know of me, knowing how I do evaluations.
Well, my guess is that it's because it's testing the integral parts of reading that a lot of the kids that you and I see are missing. And it provides the data that you need to drill down and figure out where the problems reside.
Yeah. So there's a joke, and I don't know who started telling it. There's no place to hide on the GORT. Like
Ah, nice.
you can't vocabulary yourself out of it. You can't problem solve yourself out of it. Like the task is such that if you're struggling with reading for a host of reasons, it's going to come out.
And
Okay.
when you just said the word vocabularize yourself, what you're saying is you can't memorize the heck out of it and still figure past this,
Yeah.
do well on this test.
So this is the front cover. This one is not in color, but this is the front cover of the protocol that you use when you actually administer this test. And let me blow this one up just a little bit. And again, as we've shown you on the whisk, you as a parent are allowed to see this. Okay. And the way that you want to look at it, again, we've got our orientation, the name, the gender, the grade. You notice they're missing a unidentified gender or neutral gender,
That's true.
whatever you want to call it.
Right.
That will change as we go forward.
Yeah.
Test data, all of that. So in this document, on the cover here, you generate 4 scores for each of the passages you read aloud. So they generate a score for your rate, and they give a range of reading rates. Okay. So on the first passage, if you read it under so many seconds, you get a 5, and then that brackets it down to, wow, you took too long. Okay. And that changes as you go up through each of the levels of the stories. Then they generate an accuracy score. And this is where the gold is. This is the heart of it. Any error a student makes on the test, a repetition, a substitution, a deletion, an insertion, a decoding error, an aborting of reading a word, any error they make counts in their accuracy. Okay. Well, what do you know about me when I do oral testing with a student?
You also record it so that you can count and assess. And also, it's very hard to hear what they're saying sometimes.
So I've been doing this 20 years. I've been doing the gray oral reading test for going on 25 years. Okay. I know these stories. I can recite them in my sleep. I still record every read response because you have to go back and listen to catch all the errors. People automatically forgive stuff or they don't hear the errors when they administer this test. And they actually make that recommendation in the administration manual.
Do most school psychologists record the kids?
In my limited experience, no.
So they have to get it right on the first time,
which is incredibly difficult to do. I think it is a culture issue around a lot of psychology programs that we don't record, that you have to get permission to record, and by all means stop and get permission. Like, hey, I'm going to record this so that I can make sure I heard everything that you said correctly. Are you
but
okay?
Is that a legal issue or is that just a polite issue? Or
I don't even want to go there because it's a psychology ethics issue, and since I'm not a psychologist, I don't worry about it.
Okay.
But check with your guidelines as whatever your credentialing is, but record the thing. Like, it really makes a huge difference. You're going to catch all sorts of errors that you never would have realized until you listen to it back. And I listen to almost all the stories for every student I ever assess. Okay, so you've got your rate, you've got your accuracy, and then you combine them together to get a fluency score. And then, this is the big change from previous versions of the GORT, they ask you open-ended questions about the story. Okay, so what happens if you make 900 errors in the story, Kim? Not that you make 900, but...
Well, I mean, the fluency score is going to be down, but also your comprehension score should plummet too, because you're misunderstanding the words that you're reading, which means you're going to have a problem with your comprehension.
Now, what I will see with many of my bright students is they will try and draw on background knowledge to explain the answer that they think is appropriate, not answering what the passage told them.
So they'll pull in everything from their life history.
Yes, to make up for what they didn't understand of it. Now, the other thing that it affects, so many of the questions ask for specific details of the story, like what was the description of, and I'm going to make one up, the dog? What was the description of the party, right? They'll ask for specific terms. And if you haven't read it or you are focusing so much on reading it correctly, you won't recall any of that.
And that's something that people don't understand, whether the person can read it correctly or they've memorized all the words correctly. If they're working so hard, what goes down is that ability to create images and create comprehension from the passage. And that's still not reading.
We overload their working memory and they can't understand it.
Still not.
Okay, so then you add up your total. Now, the GORT has a really interesting basal and ceiling. Do you remember what a basal is?
No.
Basal is the minimum number of items you have to get correct at a certain level to be considered a baseline skill set.
Okay.
Do you remember what a ceiling is?
The peak of that skill set for that level.
So the basal, yes, and the peak on this, or the ceiling on this, sorry, I should have done this in order. The ceiling is if you get a score of 2, 1, or 0 on 2 successive passages, you have then reached ceiling. Okay. The basal, and by the way, this only comes from the fluency. The basal is you have to get a score of 9 or 10 on 2 consecutive stories to get a basal. Okay.
And this is very significant.
Yes.
Coming up.
Now, here's the other bizarre thing that throws many clinicians off. Comprehension questions are scored independent of the fluency. Okay. So let's say you started a kid on passage 2 and they got a 9 on that, and then they got a 9 on passage 3, and they got a 10 on passage 4. That would then become your basal, and you would score from that point forward. On your comprehension, if you got a 4 and a 1 and a 6, not a 6, a 4, a 1, a 3, and so forth and so on after that, every single one of the comprehension questions for the story is scored until you reach ceiling.
So just to clarify, I guess I kind of messed up in my head. I thought basal meant they were doing poorly, but what you're saying is they got perfect scores on those lower ones,
Mhm.
which means that that's where you begin.
Right. So a basal is baseline skill set, stable.
Okay.
A ceiling is I could keep testing you, but you're going to do such a horrible job on it that we're clearly beyond your skill set, and it truly just becomes torture for the child.
And it's just garbage data. It doesn't
And
do
it's
anything.
just garbage data.
So
Okay.
wait, what number, so for the ceiling, does that 210 mean like really failing, or what does that mean?
The 2, 1, or 0 means that when you read the passage, your rate and your accuracy were so low that you were no longer even in an instructional level of reading fluency.
So does that mean you go back to the previous level, as like that level is not sustainable for testing, but the
I would
previous
never
ones are-
start you that high. So the highest you can start on the GORT is, I'm going to unshare here for just a second. The highest level you will ever start on the GORT is as a 12th grader. You will start on passage 6.
Oh, so now they are making it, even if the person is very has
So
big.
yeah, you rarely, I shouldn't say rarely. I've had some older students ceiling at a 6. And at that point, you keep going back until you get your double basal or until you're at the first story.
Oh, so sometimes you do. I mean, we've had students with superior IQs at a 3rd grade reading level in high school.
Yes.
Yes, it happens
Yes.
all the time.
Yeah.
You
So
literally go backwards.
yes. So you go back until you get your basal, and then you keep testing forward until you get your ceiling. Okay. Then you add up your rate score. Okay. And you're going to come up with whatever. And then you add up your accuracy score, which will come up with whatever. And I should run it all the way down, like we got to passage 13. And then your fluency score is going to be a combination of the two. So you automatically get 10 points for any passage that you didn't read because you had basaled. And then they add them up together until you come up with your fluency score. Now, the easy double check on this is whatever this number is should also be the same as the number when you add these two numbers together. So this fluency should be an 87 because you got 50 on rate, you got 37 on accuracy, giving you a 57. And then you pull these scores over here, your total raw scores, right? So we'd have a 50 here. We'd have a 37 here. I need to figure out how to do this on my iPad so it's actually pretty. You'd have an 87 here, and then whatever you added up for the comprehension based on the passages that you read, right? You might have a 3, a 4, whatever. And then you come down here and you'll get your overall comprehension. Let's call it a 42. Okay, so we get our 42 here. And then you go in the magic tables and you say, at 12 years, 7 months, and 18 days, your rate score puts you at whatever the magic score is. And let's just call it a 10 for the moment. And your accuracy puts you at a 7. And that puts your overall fluency should be between the two. So if you see a rate of 8 and an accuracy of 7, and your fluency is a 10, somebody didn't do the math right. Somebody didn't look up in the right column because it's the average of those two. So let's say that was an 8, and then your comprehension was a 6, then you add those two up, and then you go to another table and you take your 14 and you say, oh, that would be a oral reading quotient of 83. And I'm just pulling that out. I did not go look it up in the table, but it's just to give you the idea. Okay?
Can I say something? You tell me if it's correct to make sure they
Mhm.
understand this. So you're going from the child's individual scores,
Mhm.
and you're taking that then by going to all, are they called indices, all those tables that you talk about? And then you're taking the kid and putting him in the big world of other kids, their
Right.
age.
Right.
And that's
That
what this
raw score is then compared against all other 12-and-a-half-year-olds to almost 13-year-olds.
and again, this is not the IQ test. This is
An
a
achievement test.
processing test,
Achievement test. It's an academic test,
an
which is
academic
different than
test.
a processing test, and we'll talk about processing tests another
Oh,
time.
sorry. Okay, this is an academic test,
Yeah.
not the same as the IQ, but
Right. This will pick up kids that are struggling reading in a way that other measures won't. Just to give everybody a really quick idea, this is not the exact, like this is pulled from, we've mentioned the QRIs, some other videos, like they would literally read a passage like this, or they would read a passage, like the passages vary in complexity. They're never this long. They're normally one, maybe two paragraphs that are fairly dense. And then you have the open-ended questions about it, but they level the passages up and they get more complex. And you read them, and man, does it pick up kids with reading issues. Again, the challenge is making sure that the recording is done so that you go back and you check the errors and you make sure you count them all, because one error, one little error can have this cascade effect in your scores. But if you feel like something's been missed with your kid in terms of reading, always ask them to do a GORT and walk in saying, I give you permission, please record my student's reading and please review the recording.
interesting. And are they obligated to keep that recording too as part of the evidence of doing the testing, or you don't know that one?
Let's just not even go there.
Okay,
Ask
sorry.
for it.
So the QRI that I use and you were talking about, as a parent, if you wanted to see what it was like, it's not exactly the same as this, but you could record your child reading these passages and starting at the lower level. And
Yeah, that's what the QRI is designed to do. It will give you instructional, it'll give you a lot of information, give you a lot of good data. It's an argument to go into a school psychologist and say, look,
yes,
I did a QRI, please do a GORT on my child.
the more you bring in with your intelligence and your knowledge and what you've observed with your child and your data, the better you will be respected as a person that wants to know detail.
And again, I think we may have jumped over this. QRI is the Qualitative Reading Inventory. We tend to be acronym verbose and don't always say the
And
word.
that's not a test the school psychologist would give. This is something that you can use as your own
You
tool.
can use a general education teacher, a special education teacher can pull out a QRI and have kids read passages to really assess their reading ability. Like it's anybody can pick that up and it gives fabulous information. So,
Very
and with
good.
that, leave us questions, leave us comments, and we're looking forward to teaching you even more.